Chapter 55, Bandwidth Surfing. Wednesday, July 29th, 2308. The next day, Ross, Ash, and Jeff climbed out of the transport in an upscale park of a high-class business district. "Oh, this is great," Jeff said, looking at all the trees and smiling. "What, being out in nature?" Ross asked. "No, the bandwidth. It's thick out here." "This is not nature," Ashley mumbled, referring to the floating structure they stood on. "Wow." Jeff was amazed, grinning as he took a seat on a nearby park bench. "Ash, you brought it?" Ashley patted her back pocket. "We can stay out here all day," Jeff laughed. "No, we can't. Stay on task, Jeffrey." Ross didn't even smile. "Copy that, Gold Leader. Stay on target," Jeff grinned. Ash watched an older Chinese man practice Tai Chi across the park. He seemed absorbed in what he was doing, as if nothing in the world could disturb him. Ashley was envious of his moment of peace. She hoped someday she'd reach his esteemed age and find a park of her own. Two men walked along the sidewalk, distracting her from the old man. Ashley watched them closely. They weren't mercenaries or government agents, just executives taking a stroll. Ashley watched them and the young woman walking opposite. She watched all the people moving through the park. Ross watched too. Jeffrey sat between them, leaning back, his eyes closed. An hour or so later, Jeff took several deep breaths, then spoke in a whisper. "You have to keep it. Keep it safe. There's another. It wants to destroy it. It's pure evil. It wants to kill us and destroy the Micronics." "What are you talking about?" Ashley asked quietly. "Dad had it. He had both of them. But he doesn't have it now. It's out here and it's looking for us. It is the Metacron." Ashley shook her brother by the shoulder. Jeff, wake up." Jeffrey blinked awake. "What? What happened?" "Yeah, what happened? What were you just saying?" she asked. "I wasn't saying anything." Ross glanced at Ash. "I'm hungry," Jeff said. After a long and fruitless morning, the three of them headed across the street for lunch at a local restaurant called 4 and 20. The logo featured a blackbird breaking free from a pie. Ash found it morbidly disturbing. They talked about where Jeff was looking and how to look more effectively, but by the time lunch arrived, Jeff had begun complaining of a headache. He remained distant during the meal, distracted. Ashley suspected he was still in the network somewhere. Suddenly his eyes rolled back in his head and he crashed into the table. His nose bled, but it was unclear whether that was due to his collision with his lunch or if something more ominous was responsible. Ross paid in cash and got them out of the restaurant as quickly as possible. After an extra hour of cruising the freeways behind tinted glass, they returned to St. Vincent's. Von Kalt's phone rang. He answered it and was taken aback. It was Director Stanwood, but it was his location that caused the shock. "What's the situation, Deputy?" Stanwood asked. After visiting Bergstrom, Stanwood had pulled 40 agents from the Bureau and 20 each from DHS, ATF, and ICE. He left Von Kalt to manage the search operation by traditional methods until Bergstrom's wolf pack was ready. At the restaurant where Ross and the Fox children had eaten, Von Kalt and the bullet catchers, as Bergstrom had referred to them, had locked the surrounding area down. The agents were thick around Von Kalt. They interrogated witnesses in teams, examined everything, and bagged the plates and silverware from their target trio's table. The boy's game stream account came online. He was here, but it looks like someone else was looking for him too. He tussled with a reflected security daemon and got himself reset, Von Kalt explained. "I trust that's a mistake you won't be making yourself," Stanwood said, though it was unclear as to whether he actually understood his deputy. "Director Stanwood, sir." "Yes," Stanwood replied. "Why are you in the Capitol?" Von Kalt asked, recognizing the office. "This isn't the only challenge facing the Republic, Deputy." "Of course not, sir," Von Kalt replied. "It looks like you're on top of things there. Did they leave anything?" "No. Someone noticed they took a napkin, but that's not the same as leaving a hotel pen or a book of matches, is it?" Stanwood gave a short, uninterested laugh. "We were within a couple minutes. They were here. I can feel them." "About that," Stanwood paused for a moment. Von Kalt snapped out of his self-indulgent sixth sense and returned his attention to his superior. "Bergstrom certainly sensed the presence of your amplifier. He's creating a device that can track it. He says it has something to do with hearing smells and smelling sounds, if that makes any sense." "Perfect sense, sir. The amplifier saturates an area with particles. Those particles are inhaled and absorbed through the skin. Then messages are reflected across the particles like a chain of mirrors. At the same time, the crystals, it's not a metal, it's a crystal, sir. The crystals in contact with each other, they also reflect high-frequency oscillation, controlling the direction of the reflected light. It uses opposing forces to stay balanced, the way a helicopter does. That's fantastic, Deputy. As I said, I've spoken to Bergstrom. He's going to contact you when the wolves are ready. Will you be returning then? Let's cross that bridge when we get to it. They were here, sir. I'll catch them. You have my word. I'll find them. Oh, now that you mention it, Bergstrom has a condition for his assistants. You need to be aware of this. When you finally take them into custody, Bergstrom gets the girl. He expects a significant volume of DNA from both, but I agreed that he can have the daughter. Von Kalt was surprised to find this didn't bother him as much as it might have in the past. Also, the parameters on the case have been expanded to include the Black Willow operative group, namely Major Kelton Ross. However, anyone suspected to be giving them material aid must be considered an accomplice. All suspects are considered extremely dangerous and cleared for dead or alive protocol. Understood, sir, Von Kalt nodded. That is all, Deputy. Stanwood disconnected the call. Von Kalt smiled and squeezed the Metacron in his hand. Jeff was glued to the TV, watching footage of the park. After a while, Ashley realized there was no newscaster. She asked him what channel he was watching. Jeff explained that he'd hacked into the police band. Ashley sat with her brother and watched the footage of the local citizens being interrogated. Von Kalt had flooded the restaurant and park with agents. Everyone for 3 blocks had been identified and questioned. The hair on Ashley's arm stood up as she remembered the man doing Tai Chi. She'd seen him in the library too, staring at her, just before the agents jumped them. He was nowhere to be seen in the police footage, but Ashley was sure it had been the same man, the same long, braided white hair. Something about the coincidence disturbed her immensely. Despite all her extra stretching and practice, Ashley felt agitated. A storm had come in a couple hours earlier, but it was more than that. Jeffrey's reaction to the micronics had been troubling. Her initial reactions felt justified. The prototype was not a toy. It was not something to be casual with. She had no desire to use the mysterious hunk of metal, either as a weapon or as a mental computer connection. Yet somehow, having it with her relaxed her. It had been her father's, and for better or worse, it was all she had left of him. After dinner, Ross seemed weird, nervous. I think Jeffrey may have tripped some alarms somewhere. Ashley's brow furrowed over her bright blue eyes. He had no idea Jeff continued to peruse the intelligence files over the micronics device. Jeff took a deep breath. From what I understand, we dodged them by about 2 stoplights. The whole park was crawling with cops, mercs, and feds. They had 2 fistfights and 3 arrests, just amongst each other. Dragged everyone out of the restaurant and took them downtown, then went and found everyone else who had lunch there and brought them in too. Always paying cash. This is bad, huh? Ashley asked. I don't know. How bad is it? Ross looked at Jeff. Well, it's taken me a little to put it all together, but I think maybe it's pretty bad. They've got bounties out on us. 8, actually. They're calling you a kidnapper and offering $500,000 for you, dead or alive, with an additional bonus of $400,000 for each of us if they bring us in alive. It's over $1 million, Ashley said. We need to know who's offering that kind of scratch, Ross said. Angel City Police Department, Los Angeles County Sheriff, State of California Police, Federal Bureau of Investigation, Immigration Customs Enforcement, National Security Agent. Okay, we get it. We can't go after everyone, Ross interrupted. What about just the last guy? National Intelligence Director. Who gave you the nosebleed? Ross asked Jeff. All he said was, "This is Eel," and then bam, I was down. The Electric Eel? Damn, I've heard of that guy. I know the FBI has some full-time operators hardwired into their defense grid. He probably just thought he was resetting your system. You didn't know he was shorting out your head. Anyhow, documents are coming in today, so I want you guys to be ready to go as soon as I get back with them. What about the storm? Ashley asked. Visibility's for shit. Radio comms are all fouled up. Couldn't ask for better weather. The gods are smiling on us, Ross answered. Chapter 56, The Black Willow Gun Trees. Sunset, Wednesday, July 29th, 2308. The invisible surveillance trailer drifted in a bending loop, locked into a track that delivered line of sight with the western side of District 13 and Bergstrom's attached hangar. Inside, First Sergeant King monitored the transmission streams from the tiny microtransmitters he'd sprayed through Dr. Bergstrom's section of the orphanage. Stanwood had called 3 times, and Bergstrom repeatedly claimed to be on track to deliver his first micronics scanner by nightfall. Stanwood had in turn called Von Kalt, and the deputy dutifully returned the call to Dr. Bergstrom. Now, as the sun continued to sink toward the Pacific Ocean, Bergstrom approached the final preparations in his hangar. Assistants ran through checklists on the armored war machines, making sure they were fueled up and the ammunition magazines were loaded and made ready. King's trailer and the attached Black Willow battlesuit both had their own phase cam and were operating under a 100-meter avoidance protocol, meaning that the autopilot, on its anchored loop, would maintain a 100-meter cushion from any passing vehicle or drifting vendors. The Angel City skyscape, with 300 days of summer, had always been one of the more crowded utopias of the modern world. Tasks for much more than 100 meters would be difficult. Given their invisibility and the autopilot protocols, a knock at the trailer door surprised King. He opened it without getting up. Croswell activated the magnetic anchor on his battlesuit, linking it to the trailer, and climbed out. He fearlessly launched himself into the open sky, leaping across the significant gap between his suit and the trailer. The Secretary of Defense crashed into the trailer, needing every bit of the 2 steps he had to stop before smashing into a bank of surveillance equipment. "That's a bit excessive, don't you think?" King asked from his place at the terminal. Croswell laughed. "Gotta push yourself a little harder every day." "That's what she said," King smiled. Croswell laughed again. "No Ross, no snow?" he asked. "ETA 5 mics, King answered. "Goddamn Stanwood. He gave me his word he'd drop it, that little bastard. We're going to visit him next." His calls were being relayed through a DC substation. "I don't care where he is, I'll find him," Croswell said. "Well, here's his little buddy right on cue," King pointed out an approaching vehicle. "All right, let's get in our gear," Croswell said. "Let me finish routing these streams into our suits," King answered. "I'll be waiting for you." Croswell took 2 steps and grunted as he leapt from the trailer. King laughed and sighed, rising from the terminal. The first sergeant called his suit over and lightly stepped from the trailer into the modular cockpit. The suit was more of an armored vehicle, a man-shaped tank, stocked with a variety of cannon and missile banks. Inside, the surveillance streams were arrayed in a strip across the top of the windshield. King settled into the suit. His arms were its arms. His legs were its legs. Regardless of the fact that his hands and feet, at their most extended, never reached outside of the suit's main cabin, in the chest. There was no head per se, just a cluster of scanners and cameras. 2 long-barreled sniper rifles protruded from the sides of what would have been its jawline. Above them, antennae reached out at 20-degree angles. Centered between, like a mohawk, 3 missiles were stacked, one atop another, in a narrow magazine. The armored limbs served both offensive and defensive roles, boasting heavy armor plates and gun barrels in a variety of caliber. Flanks of missiles were mounted to each hip, and 6-barreled Gatling guns were bolted onto both shoulders and on the outside of the massive feet. Anti-gravity drives on the soles of the feet, the floor of the cabin, and the underside of the forearms managed elevation, pitch, roll, and acceleration velocity. King's feet were strapped into the flight controls, while his hands managed the 36 weapon systems, displayed on the windshield and dashboard. The video and audio from Bergstrom's lab was piped in as well. King listened and occasionally glanced up as the suit ran through its pre-flight spooling operations. Director Bergstrom introduced Von Kalt to his assistants and the other pilots. "You ready for this?" Croswell asked. "Are we not waiting for Anna and Kelly?" "They'll either be here or they won't," Croswell said. "I want to line up on the right side of the hangar door. And when it slides open, wait for me, but once I open up, just let 'em have it." "Sounds good to me," King replied. "I'll take the outside. As they begin to react, I'll slide up and around to a perpendicular position, but aiming at a downward trajectory. This will keep the bulk of the orphanage out of the line of fire." "Until they fire back, that is," King replied, piloting his tank into position. "Well, that'll have to be on them then," Croswell answered, taking up a position at King's left. "After the first volley, if I can effectively suppress them and keep them from getting out, I'll move up out of the way to reload. That's when I want you to swing inside. The good old jab cross." "Exactly. After you blow your load, fall out and I'll swing in to give him another helping." King laughed. "We're going to cut this place in half." On the feed from inside the hangar, Bergstrom was helping the pilots get situated. "Okay, see that big device on the outside wall?" King asked, pointing up to a landing pad featuring a large radar dish where Bergstrom had spent the bulk of his day. That's their scanner. From what I understand, it works like basic radar. He said it'll be good for 30 miles in every direction. He claims to be able to forward them coordinates on any active amplifier in the city, King said. He hasn't tested it yet? Croswell asked. Apparently not, or they'd be scrambling, King answered. Some pretty serious arrogance. Yeah, well, he wouldn't be Bergstrom otherwise, would he? No, I suppose not, Croswell laughed. In the hangar, the first 2 wolves were airborne. Here we go, Croswell said. King heard the Gatling guns on Croswell's unit engage their motors, humming as they spun up, but not firing yet. The second 2 wolves had been activated and lined up behind the first. The wolves were just dumbed-down versions of the Black Willow suit, carrying about a third of the firepower and none of Fox's top-secret tech, like the phase camouflage. The phase cam was just one of the Black Willow team's hidden aces. No one had been able to mimic it. Apparently they'd found a replacement pilot for Stanwood, as the last 2 wolves lifted off and moved into place. Bergstrom triggered the hangar door. Croswell waited. King waited. The wolves waited. King's angle along the district prevented him from being able to see Dr. Bergstrom deeper in the lab. He watched him on the surveillance streams from the micro-transmitters. Bergstrom crossed over to his newly completed micronic scanner. I've calibrated it for the most range possible, so let's give her some juice. He reached out, switching it on. The piercing electronic scream, caused by the immediate proximity of King and Croswell, shattered the otherwise quiet afternoon. The wolves, their pilots stunned, stumbled from their few feet of altitude and fell to the floor of the hangar. Bergstrom jumped to the controls, cranking the power back down. In the same moment, King realized their phase cam was completely compromised. Then Croswell opened fire, ripping into the forward wolves, his heavy rounds denting their armor and driving them back as they struggled to recover from Bergstrom's sonic surprise. Croswell launched his loaded missile banks. 9 rocket-powered warheads streaked into the hangar. The wolves were tossed about like leaves before a late autumn wind. Croswell swung up and around to reload. King jumped into the fray, landing on the hangar floor, streaming rounds from every barrel he could fire at once. He leapt into the air, switched from guns to missiles, and let go with his 9. As King rolled toward the left side of the hangar door, the missiles ripped holes in the far side of the structure. Only 3 of the wolves were still intact. The forward units had taken the brunt of the attack and come apart. King's magazine spent, he moved back toward the open sky, hesitating before clearing Croswell's line of fire. The remainder of the home squadron opened fire with their guns. King took the hits as Croswell returned fire over his head. King tumbled from the lip of the hangar. At least one of his drives and his stabilizer had been compromised given the way he rolled. Then 7 more missiles streaked away from his unit, arcing from the damaged tank and crashing up into the hangar. Croswell laughed. King hadn't hesitated. He'd been getting a heat lock. The secretary pulled back as 5 more missiles streaked toward the hangar. King had gotten his damaged tank under control and fired again. 3 more missiles. Then his final warhead. When Croswell hovered down, the hangar was a billowing cloud of smoke and debris. Over the radio, King called out, "We've got 2 fleeing to the north." Croswell dropped down below the hangar. A massive hole had been ripped in the far end. In the distance, 2 wolves could be seen ducking under the hovering plates of the industrial district. "What's your status?" Croswell asked. King activated his personal anti-gravity harness and ejected from his Black Willow battle tank just a few moments before it exploded. "It's not the answer I was looking for," the secretary muttered. Croswell retracted the barrels from his right forelimb and extended a 3-pronged mechanical hand. He chased after the tumbling and unconscious first sergeant, catching him and re-engaging his phase cam. Croswell retreated to the now visible surveillance trailer and docked his invisible battle tank. Inside, he reset the trailer phase cam, and after a moment of sputtering, it engaged. "Goddamn Bergstrom," Croswell muttered. On the monitors, he saw Captain Snow and Major Ross pull up outside the trailer and laughed. As they entered, Croswell's phone rang. He answered. "Secretary Croswell?" they heard someone say. "Yes, sir, Mr. President," Croswell answered. "I need you to come down to my office with all the remaining members of the Black Willow operations." "You know there's only 2 of us left, sir, myself and Major Ross." "In my office ASAP." "Yes, sir," Croswell replied. Conway disconnected and Croswell closed the communicator. He looked up at Captain Snow and Major Ross. "Looks like we're going to the East Coast." "I'll load some magazines," Ross answered. Croswell laughed. He looked over to Snow. "You should go directly back to St. Vincent's. 2 of the wolves escaped, and and the slippery little turd Bergstrom did too. He'll have another scanner fabricated by midnight. Croswell looked over at Ross. Call Reed and have him join her. He looked back to Anna. We'll be back as soon as we can. Ross laughed. If at all. And where is the package? Ross asked. How long does it take the Secretary of Defense to work up some fake IDs? Where do you think we're going? Croswell smiled. Chill with the negative waves already. Chapter 57, Supplication. Wednesday night, 11 p.m., July 29th, 2308. Croswell and Ross got some much-needed shut-eye on the 3-hour flight to the East Coast. They docked in the guest parking unit and reported to the Secret Service checkpoint in their battle armor. The saluting guards fell over each other to admit Major Ross and the Secretary of Defense. Croswell was a common enough sight at the White House, but these guards had never seen him in a fully augmented Black Willow Terrellium battlesuit. Conway left them waiting in the conference room for almost an hour. Finally, the guards returned and escorted Croswell and Ross to the Oval Office. The room was empty. Neither man sat down, but waited another hour standing at parade rest. Finally, President Conway entered, furious. Croswell and Ross both noticed the diplomatic pouch he carried and dropped on his desk. The White House Chief of Staff, John Phillips, followed closely. Would you gentlemen explain yourselves, please? Conway asked. What's the issue, sir? Croswell asked. The issue? The issue, sir, is 2 Black Willow battle tanks opening fire on a stateside orphanage? Enlighten me, please, sir. If you know that much, you know precisely what's going on, Mr. President. I'd like to hear you say it, Mr. Croswell. I'd like to hear your explanation of events. Go fuck yourself, sir. Phillips was suddenly screaming, jabbing his finger in Croswell's face. That's the goddamn President of the United States! Phillips' assault came to an abrupt halt when Croswell grabbed his finger and broke it. Croswell held the man at his side, like a dog on a leash. I don't think you understand who you're speaking to, Big John. Croswell slowly returned his attention to Conway. Mr. President, please know, everything I do is in defense of your person and in defense of this office, as well as the Republic at large. Sometimes I have to make decisions that you might disagree with. For those I ask for your forgiveness. As the chief of your generals, there are things I cannot tell you, burdens I carry, so you don't have to. What I did today, opening fire on known criminals who'd infested a public institution and exploited the youth of this republic to their own ends, while regrettable, was necessary, and I protected your office from any culpability as much as I could. Croswell looked down at Phillips. However, it would appear that we also have another problem. James, please let Mr. Phillips go. Sir, it would appear your office has been compromised. Dr. Bergstrom is a known criminal. He's been on the Republic's Most Wanted for the better part of a decade. He's experimented on children. Phillips seemed to have found his voice. Fox is a criminal, and he experimented on children too. We both know that's not true, Croswell answered. What about the 7982 plant? Phillips asked. Croswell squeezed the finger and the big man whimpered. That was a genetic engineering research project, all done on slides and in petri dishes, on a microscopic level. Croswell fixed Phillips with a glare that could melt glaciers, twisted his finger, and released it. Phillips retreated several steps, but couldn't stay quiet. You're nothing without Fox. He's gone, and you're a paper tiger. Croswell laughed. I've been called a lot of things, but never that. The secretary turned to President Conway. While you left us waiting, I did a little digging of my own. You both know that Major Ross and I are registered Micronics owners. It took us less than half an hour to assemble a paper trail implicating your office in this Bergstrom mess. Someone in this office put Deputy Director Von Kalt in touch with Dr. Cedric Bergstrom with the express purpose of chasing down 2 unarmed children. Phillips snorted. Consider this an act of goodwill. Why don't you take a look at Senator Miller? I did, last week. Major Ross and I blew out the senator's window and sprayed his office with about 3,000 microtransmitters. That's illegal, Phillips objected. For just about anyone except me, sure. I hold the office of Secretary of Defense, and as such, I am vested with legal powers that exceed those of any commissioned officer, and are second only to the office of the President. You, Mr. Phillips, are the White House Chief of Staff. You're just a glorified assistant. You have no real power outside this structure. Croswell smiled. You see, the thing is, I intercepted about a dozen messages between Senator Miller and someone in this office. What would the public think about sending Bergstrom's wolf pack after kids? There's a warrant out for those children, Phillips interjected. Doesn't mean you get to break the law to recover them. Sir, let me remind you, you're talking about the children of Dr. Andrew Fox. You honestly think he just let you cut them up? Those children are outfitted with one of his most secret inventions. He called it the failsafe. And if they're killed by violent means, an implanted chip will be detonated, releasing a 5-kiloton yield on the spot, decimating whoever might be responsible. Now do you understand why I cannot permit them to be taken, under any circumstances? Phillips pulled himself upright and narrowed his eyes. The warrant says alive, Mr. Secretary. To what end? Croswell asked. He shook his head. And you can't take them alive, and you know that. The warrant stands, Phillips shouted. It's completely legal. It's watertight. Fox broke the law. He endangered everyone on the entire West Coast, and this failsafe sounds illegal as hell. What if there was an accident? What gives Fox the right to kill everyone in a 20-block radius because his kids got mugged? Croswell laughed. Because he can. It does sound rather selfish and more than a bit careless, President Conway interjected. Croswell paused. Phillips leaned forward. Besides, we already had them once, but Ross interfered. That's obstruction of justice. He gestured with his damaged hand. I don't know what you're talking about, Ross answered humbly. You were seen in an Angel City library, obstructing a federal investigation. Oh, you mean those guys who were threatening people with guns? I don't know what that was about. I saw some idiots who seemed like they were trying to stick up a public library. Yeah, I pulled my badge and identified myself. 2 of them grabbed some kids as human shields, but whoever they were, they didn't have any IDs or a warrant. I never did find out what that was all about. You were shot, Phillips stated. That's right, twice. I heard it was 3 times, Phillips said. Yeah, well, I should know, Ross replied. Why didn't you wait for the police? I needed emergency medical attention. Conway raised his hand. Could everyone just calm down, please? No one spoke for a few moments. Croswell cleared his throat before speaking quietly. I'm sure you recognize what kind of legal and moral issues this represents for your administration. Either yourself or your chief of staff provided material support to this known criminal Bergstrom. The president raised a hand. Dr. Bergstrom was prosecuted by the previous administration, Mr. Secretary. It's absolutely true, sir, and with good reason. He's not been pardoned, also with good reason. And believe me, sir, I really am sorry. But since it would be treasonous on my part to charge you or any sitting president with treason and collusion with such a publicly despised enemy of the state, we are left with only one option. Croswell drew his handgun. Conway stumbled backwards. Croswell turned to face Phillips. The humbled chief of staff glared back. Croswell offered Phillips the gun. Do the honorable thing for once in your fat, filthy, disgusting, worm's-eye view of a life. Ross smiled, despite his best efforts not to. Conway stared in dumbfounded shock, as his chief of staff seemed to engage in a struggle with himself. Phillips' hand shook, his arm and face twitched, but he reached out and took the pistol from Secretary Croswell. John, no! President Conway said. The weapon gradually came up, pressing against Phillips' temple. He screamed and struggled to pull the pistol away. The Secret Service guards, posted at the closed doors, burst into the room and witnessed the president's chief of staff, Big John Phillips, blow his brains all over the back wall. Croswell turned to President Conway. I'm very sorry for your loss, sir. I'll continue to do my best for your office in the Republic of the United States. As for myself, I'd like your permission to collect the ID packet I requested and return to the West Coast. I assure you I'll wrap this up as quietly as possible. Conway said nothing but lifted the diplomatic pouch from his desk and handed it to Croswell. Croswell stooped to pick up his weapon from the carpeted floor. Good evening, sir, Ross said, following Croswell out of the office and past the stunned Secret Service guards. In the transport, Croswell held the diplomatic pouch. The hell was that? Ross asked. I actually don't want to give you this, Croswell said, looking at the Republic seal stamped onto the leather document pack. Don't you think you could have gotten IDs in some easier way? I mean, why'd you have to go through Conway of all people? Seems like the definition of stupid. Croswell looked at him. Thanks for the vote of confidence. Let me ask you, why did you ask me to do this for you? Because I knew whoever I went to was going to set off alarm bells, and that you'd end up hearing about it sooner or later anyhow. There was no point going behind your back. Well, it goes 1,000 times more for me and Conway. However I did this, even if it wasn't until you guys were long gone, sooner or later he was going to have to come and ask me why I went behind his back. It's much easier to speak to him like a man and give him the chance to do the right thing. This way his conscience is clear. That's why you don't want to give it to me? Ross asked. No, I don't want to give it to you because I don't think those kids should have to run for their lives. They deserve better than that. There has to be a better way. Chapter 58, Overwatch. Late Wednesday night, July 29th, 30th, 2308. Out on the far western edge of the Republic's border, the derelict hotel, bearing darkened signs reading St. Vincent's, drifted over the Pacific. Before Ross left, he'd set the building's autopilot to a drifting loop out over the ocean. It would mess up the children's escape routes, but at least they wouldn't be there when the enemy arrived in the first place. Further inland, the 405 freeway cable ran up from the south, past the city until it was bisected by the 101, running from the east side of downtown through Ventura County and out to Santa Barbara. St. Vincent's hugged the pocket caused by this freeway intersection, not too far from the Canyon neighborhood where Ashley had grown up. Anna had convinced Reed to stack themselves in their battle tanks, anchored in a vertical line over the hotel. She reasoned that since Cedric's Micronics scanner used a flat-scan radar-style technology, the battle tanks and Ashley's Micronics, at the same location, would read as a single device. All they had to do was stay anchored in tandem, syncing their personal harness with the tanks. At the top of the stack, the pair scanned the slow-drift traffic with their rifle scopes. What Captain Snow did not predict was the military convoy that had queued up behind the two remaining wolves. "Are you sure this is a good idea?" Reed asked, feeling his heartbeat rise as he spotted the wolves and the convoy approaching below. They were still a dozen miles out. "What about Ashley and Jeff?" he asked. Anna sighed. "Let's worry about that if we survive. Ross wires a good safe house from what I remember." Below them, the Maxwell armored fighting vehicles slowed and moved into a flying V formation, drifting in step as the wolves prepped weapons and accelerated toward their targets. "Let her rip," Captain Snow said. "Yes, ma'am," Reed answered. Below them his battle tank launched missiles in series. 3, then 2, 3, 2, 5, 3. The wolves proved surprisingly agile, kicking out chaff and rolling past the warheads. Their independent tracking miniguns chased the missiles and triggered them at a safe distance from the tank's armored hide. Anna's Black Willow tank opened fire with its machine guns, ripping into the nearest wolf as it launched a handful of its own missiles. "Look," Reed said, pointing to the 5 Maxwells that had begun creeping forward again. Their weapons were adjusting, aiming for the invisible origins of the fire hurled against the encroaching wolves. Reed's battle tank opened fire on the armored vehicles. One of the wolves, fleeing the line of fire, turned upward and climbed directly toward Reed and Anna. Anna and the chief warrant officer smiled at each other and aimed with their long-barreled rifles. Together they opened fire on the armored wolf as he accelerated through the atmosphere. Anna's first shot hit him in the shoulder, screaming wildly off the armored plate, but slowing his ascent significantly. Reed had aimed at the second and struck him at a gap in the plate, his round ripping into the wolf's mechanical aorta. The first wolf opened fire, and as the rounds of his minigun reached them, Anna released the gravity sink with her tank, executing an aerial cartwheel, her body no longer in the line of fire, but her shot lined up. She fired, but only hit him in the thigh, spinning him to the left. The second wolf, venting pressurized fluids and incapable of maneuvering after being plugged by Reed, found himself with a shot on Anna. He opened up with everything, blindsiding her, but sacrificing himself. Reed, still in control of his gun tree, fired with 4 rifles and 5 missiles, scoring enough direct hits to separate the wolf into loaf-sized pieces. But the damage was done. The tumbling wolf had righted himself and retreated as Reed's battle tank, though wounded, ascended toward their elevation. Reed put the wounded Captain Snow in the tank and programmed it for a safe house across town. The Maxwells had not missed either aerial engagement and moved in to continue the assault. Their .50 caliber guns chased Reed and the severely wounded captain from the sky, scoring several more hits before the pair of them escaped to a safe distance. Chapter 59, Shotguns and Tripwires. Thursday, July 30th, 2308. Jeff shook his sister and whispered, "Ash, wake up. They're here." Ash woke with a start. "What?" She rubbed her face. "Where's Ross?" He's not back yet. Jeff looked up. Listen. Ash heard it. Booms that sounded like thunder and an underlying rat-a-tat-tat that she recognized as the sound of machine guns. What's going on out there? She asked. Some kind of firefight, Jeff said. You should get in the car, urged Ashley. Not yet, Jeff answered. Ash glared at him. They don't have a heat signature on us. The building is shielded somehow, Jeff explained. I'm tapped into their frequencies. I can hear everything they're saying. They've been attacked by Black Willow units and lost the wolves, but they're expecting more resistance. Sounds like the fight is over. Overhead, the booms became more sporadic and then ceased altogether. They're regrouping, Jeff said. They have orders to take us alive, and somehow they know Ross is gone. They've ordered a room-by-room search. Jeff pointed to the security monitors. On 3 of the 7 balconies, dark forms descended on ropes. They huddled in front of the sliding doors and went to work cutting circles in the glass. Once they cracked the circles of glass free from the doors, they simply reached in and unlocked the sliding panels. Ashley appreciated the old-school nature of the situation. The balcony doors at this hotel weren't voice-operated or even digitally wired. The attacking soldiers had prepared appropriately. The first tripwire was hit. The explosion shook the hotel, much louder than the aerial combat. This blast rocked the cement floor under the children's feet. The 3 soldiers in Unit 4 were blown out through the balcony doors. 2 lay crumpled and bleeding while the 3rd was blown from the balcony altogether. If the shrapnel and concussive blast wave injuries didn't kill him, his impact with the ocean surely would. Ashley and Jeff watched the remaining soldiers in rooms 2 and 6. They didn't move. Using a flashlight, the lead man in 2 identified one of the monofilament tripwires. He crept toward the charges attached to the line, brushing away a piece of newspaper. Ashley took the open wire and touched it to the appropriate peg, shredding the room with steel and glass. Jeff tugged at Ashley's elbow as the wall of the garage was blown out. On the monitors, a small group of soldiers entered, detaching their fast-drop lines before moving deeper into the garage. Ashley waited until they were aligned with the wired trash can before blowing it. The blast separated the soldiers, slashing into the soft spots between their armor plates, lacerating vital organs and arteries. The soldiers in room 6 had not moved since the first blast. Ashley held the wire close to the peg for 6LR. It was the largest of the suites and subsequently contained more explosives. After some time, one soldier straightened up a bit and took a step backward toward the balcony. Another soldier shook his head and pressed deeper into the unit. The 3rd man stood his ground, neither advancing nor retreating. The inward soldier spotted a tripwire and pointed it out to his comrades, slipping toward the charges to defuse them. Ashley's hovering hand went to the nail and the charges detonated. The soldier attempting to defuse the charge came apart while his comrades were knocked flat. More coming, Jeff said. On the monitors, the sliding glass doors of Units 1 and 5 were shot out by the heavy machine guns of the circling transports. 3 more soldiers came in through the hole in the garage. Ashley triggered another trash can, knocking them from their feet. A dozen soldiers landed on the balconies of the blown-out units. You have to run the board, Ashley said. She took the micronics out of her pocket and set it on the table. How good are you at this thing? I'm getting better, Jeff said. Ashley pulled out the phone Ross gave her. Do you think you could call me on this? Jeff nodded. Why? Because I'm going upstairs, she said. You're what? Jeff asked. I'm going up there. They're not all dead yet. Yeah, Ash, they're not all dead yet. And there's going to be more of them coming. She plugged her earphones into the phone. Can you do it or not? A moment later, the phone rang. Can you hear me? Jeff asked. Ashley nodded, smiling. She disconnected the shotgun and pulled it from the brace. Can you put this back? I can do it, Jeff answered. Ashley hugged her little brother and slipped out the door. Why don't you take it with you? Jeff asked. There's plenty up there. Now lock the door. Jeff locked the door behind her and put the shotgun in the brace. You're clear to the kitchen, he said, returning to his place in front of the detonation board. Not that he needed to see the monitors. The micronics provided more surveillance options than the few cameras they'd set up. Jeffrey could see through the soldiers' helmet cams. Ash, the micronics is picking up the command vehicles. Sounds like 2 of them are deploying troops and there's 3 on standby. They're big enough to carry 30 men. Ashley whispered, Get in the car, Jeff. Jeff scanned the monitors. No way, this just started. Upstairs, Ashley crept into the kitchen, pulling a few extra explosive pies from the fridge. There were 3 exits from the administration offices, into the main lobby, the garage, or the maintenance hallway. In the main hall, the offset doors were wired to their own set of charges. Ashley peeked out through the lobby into the hall. Everything was quiet. None of the charges in the hall had been detonated, and the lobby doors leading to the garage were closed. Coming in from the garage, 4 this time. No, wait, 6. Oh God, 6 more. They're heading to you, to the lobby, Jeff said over the earphones. Ashley ducked behind the main counter as the soldiers opened the doors to the garage. The blast shook the floor underneath her. Somehow, over the ringing in her head, Ashley heard Jeff say, "They're down. The guys in 1 and 5 are holding still." Ash slowly stood behind the counter, surveying the damage. The doors had been blown from their hinges and lay out in the lobby. The soldiers lay twitching and groaning, or still. Ash boldly walked toward the garage. She picked up the first loose weapon she came across, a tactical shotgun, similar to the one downstairs. She clicked the safety off. The smoke hung in the air the way the ringing hung in her ears. Ashley approached the first soldier. He lay at her feet and moaned. Blood ran from his eyes, mouth, nose, and ears. Ashley pointed the shotgun at his head and squeezed the trigger. It erupted with a boom. She ejected the spent shell and chambered another, as Ross had shown her. She entered the garage and walked directly toward the next man, who objected to the best of his ability, raising his hands and crying, "No, no, no!" "Who sent you?" Ashley asked, aiming the shotgun at his face. "Command," he admitted. "We have legal warrants." The soldier turned his face away from the gun, tension knotting his features. "Who?" Ashley demanded. "We were cleared at the top. National Intelligence Director." Ashley raised the collapsible stock of the shotgun to her shoulder, aiming it. "What's his name?" "Director Stanwood, Director Stanwood," he screamed. Ashley fired. The name hung in her head, forever chiseled into her memory by the concussion of the blast. She walked to each of the soldiers in turn. From those who were already dead, Ash collected weapons and ammunition. If they were awake enough to answer, she asked who sent them. Some answered her honestly, for which she granted them a quick and merciful release from their pain. Some soldiers showed a bit more fortitude and refused to answer. They were rewarded with the loss of a limb. Either way, the end result was the same. When the shotgun ran out of shells, she picked up another. Occasionally she heard the sound of explosives from some other section of the hotel, but no one interrupted her until she'd finished. Even Jeff had gone quiet. Over and over again, Ashley heard the names Stanwood and Von Kalt. When her ears stopped ringing, it was her own name she heard being repeated by the little voice in her head. "Ashley! Ashley, do you hear me? Ash! Ash! There are more of them coming. You have to get out of there." Ashley was all the way across the garage, close enough to where the soldiers breached the wall to enjoy a refreshing breeze blowing in from the night outside. She stepped closer. The fresh air smelt incredible after the stale motel. 2 soldiers suddenly appeared before her, hanging on spider lines. Ashley raised the shotgun and fired, causing them to vanish in an explosion of lead and smoke. She turned and sprinted from the garage. "It's okay," Jeff said. "It's okay." They pulled back for a second. Ashley slung the shotgun as she ran for the kitchen. She collected as many bomb pots as she could carry and returned to the garage. She armed 4 pots and set them in series before the gaping hole. Jeff spoke up over her earphones. "They're shifting their approach. Coming from the units. Number 5. They're coming." Ashley sprinted across the garage and into the kitchen again. She grabbed a few plastic and nail-packed glasses and crept toward the doors to the lobby. From behind the counter, she peered into the hall. It was empty. Ashley slipped around the counter and toward the larger doorway. Number 5's doors had already been blown from their hinges. 3 men stepped from the blasted room and into the hall. They carefully picked their way past several tripwires. Ashley was trapped, and she knew it. There was no way she could escape without drawing them after her. From here, if they were careful, they could follow her all the way to the basement. Ashley took a deep breath and stepped out to confront them. They hesitated at the sight of the child standing before them, even if she did have a shotgun strapped across her back and her hands full of what appeared to be improvised explosives. Ashley narrowed her eyes and tossed the glasses at the soldiers and dove for the kitchen as the barrels of their guns came up. The moment stretched into slow motion. The soldiers sprayed the area with bullets. They missed Ashley but detonated the charges flying toward them. The burning shrapnel ripped into them. She rose to discover there was no one left for her to interrogate. Ashley collected as many of the glasses as she could carry and rushed from the kitchen, through the admin offices, and down the basement stairwell, setting the charges behind her as she went. From the units above, she heard several more detonations. Crouched to the side of the rigged door leading to her brother and their escape vehicle, she waited, listening. The explosions had stopped. After moments of silence, Jeff whispered over the phone, "All clear. They're pulling out. They said they lost enough for one evening." "I'm going to double check," Ashley said, creeping back up the stairs. "Okay, but be careful. They could still be alive." Ash made a careful second sweep of the units. For any found alive, she had one question. Who sent you? Stanwood or Von Kalt was always the answer. Ashley's mercy was consistent and quick. She didn't think about it. She didn't wonder if she was doing the right thing. She didn't care if Jeff or her parents might disapprove. She didn't care if the enemy was listening over their radios. It did occur to her that they were answering too easily, almost as if she were asking, "Who's the President of the United States?" The soldiers didn't seem to be giving up secret information in the betrayal of their superiors. Once she'd cleared the upper floors, Ash collected their weapons and ammunition. Carrying it all downstairs, she lined the walls of their command center with shotguns, assault rifles, and pistols. Ashley used their grenades to replace some of the spent munitions, rewiring the kill zones and booby-trapping the bodies of the soldiers. She and Jeff didn't discuss the situation as she busied herself with the tasks at hand. Once she finished, she took a seat next to him, scanning the monitors. Ash didn't realize she'd drifted off to sleep until Jeff woke her. "Ross is here," he whispered. A moment later, Ashley's phone alerted her with an incoming call. Chapter 60. Breakdown. Thursday, July 30th, 2308. Chief Warrant Officer Reed called Major Ross. "Sir, we just got our asses handed to us. Snow is out and I'm limping back to Montrose on a residual charge. I hope you guys are on your way back." "What do you mean, you're leaving them alone?" Ross shouted in reply from the passenger seat of the speeding transport. "Chief, I need you to put Snow on autopilot and turn around immediately." "They brought in 5 Maxwells, Major. I'm happy to go back. You know that. But Captain Snow and I are both last legs. If she doesn't get some medical attention, well, her suit isn't going to save her. We knocked out both the remaining wolves, but we lost one of the gun trees, and this one isn't going to make it very far. I hope you wired Vinny up tight, because whether I go back or not, it's locked down." "Do not go back, Chief. Do you hear me?" Croswell said. "Their orders are to take the children alive. They won't go in heavy-handed. Proceed to Rally Point Montrose. We will meet you there." "I called the preacher and the rest of the Charlie team, but none of them are any closer than 12 hours. I also activated the despooler on Ashley's Micronics, so whatever signals are bleeding out of St. Vincent's, they won't be able to record them. We need to get to work on jamming that scanner of Bergstrom's, or even if they do manage to escape, it won't be for very long. Are you still streaming those signals, Chief? Can you forward them to us?" "Hey, is it true Phillips is dead?" Reed asked. "I asked you to forward the signals, not scan the headlines." "Copy, sir. Mirroring to your amplifiers now." Von Kalt regained control of the battlesuit, but there was no returning to the fight. He'd expended most of his ordnance, and he was bleeding altitude. He was still considerably higher than most of the hanging city, but unless he moved inland, sooner or later he was going to drown. The alarms ringing in his head made listening to the progress of the assault on St. Vincent's impossible. If he didn't get out of the suit soon, he wouldn't. Von Kalt crashed into the courtyard of an abandoned shopping center, shattering the tiles under the wolf's heavy Terrellium armor plates. He triggered the ejection handle and the suit blasted him across the parking lot, the parachute unfurling behind him. Von Kalt tucked and rolled as he crashed into the courtyard. The guidelines and Kevlar chute wrapped around him like a carpet around Cleopatra. The battlesuit, no longer occupied with protecting the meat puppet pilot, attempted to right itself and exploded. Fiery shrapnel hit the deputy director hard enough to bruise him, but didn't rip through the bulletproof weave. A few minutes later, he'd extricated himself and taken a cooler seat across the courtyard. The Sky Mall gave Von Kalt a perfect view of the ongoing hostilities at St. Vincent's. The Maxwell vehicles hung overhead like vultures, while white and orange flashes sporadically erupted from the motel, followed by billowing plumes of smoke and tongues of fire. His ears had only just stopped ringing when his communicator took up the challenge. It was Stanwood. Von Kalt accepted the call but didn't speak. "Oh my God, what happened to you?" Stanwood asked. It must have been clear, given his beaten and battered visage, that all was not well. He didn't answer but looked back at St. Vincent's. "I'm monitoring from my end. A rescue craft is inbound." Von Kalt looked back to Stanwood's holographic image projected before him. "Phillips is dead. Croswell and Ross were in the room." Von Kalt took a deep breath. He didn't say a word, but his glare spoke volumes. "Conway has ordered you to stand down. He wants you to call back the Maxwells." Apparently Fox, sick bastard that he was, implanted his own kids with 5-kiloton failsafe devices. Von Kalt broke his silence. "So what? They're in the middle of nowhere." "The order was for them to be taken alive, Director." Von Kalt looked at the burning motel and the hovering assault vehicles. He snapped the communicator closed and tossed it over the nearby ledge. Ross returned to St. Vincent's at dawn. The sun's first rays revealed the extensive damage to the exterior of the motel, highlighting the wholesale carnage on the balconies. He noticed that several of the soldiers had been blatantly wired with explosives, right where they lie, like some macabre battlefield joke. Ross triggered the remote for the garage doors and was greeted by the sight of a dozen more soldiers, dead and still wet. He noticed that none of them were armed and doubted they'd arrived that way. He took the cruiser off autopilot and found a section of the floor where he wouldn't be setting the transport on top of a corpse. The Major cautiously picked his way past Ashley's hasty ambush lines and made his way to the basement. He dialed the phone, but Ashley was already there, disengaging the shotgun and opening the door. Ross killed the call and entered. He did a double take at all the assault rifles and handguns. He met Ashley's eyes but said nothing. Ross, Croswell, and Reed had all caught the same streamed bits of Ashley's interrogations. Where was he supposed to start that conversation? Don't break the fifth wall? God give me strength. "I have the papers. It's time to go," he said. "But we know who did it. We have evidence," Ashley said. "What evidence?" Ross asked. "Their confessions. They told me." "Before you blew their faces off?" he asked. Ashley hesitated to answer the obvious flaw in her logic. "None of those cameras are spooling, so there's no recording of their confessions. And lucky for you, there's no recording of their executions." Ashley had no reply. "Now let's get out of here," Ross said. Von Kalt had never called off the assault. Stanwood had been forced to take remote control of the op all the way from D.C. The deputy director couldn't have cared less. As Stanwood had promised, one of the Maxwells broke off and stopped to pick him up. He made no effort to board the flying pig. 2 sergeants had to run out and half drag, half walk him aboard. The vehicle's commander was incensed. He wanted to rescue the wounded or at least recover the deceased. He swore that it wasn't over. Apparently suffering from shock, Von Kalt made no attempt to reply. They reached the armory sometime later and Von Kalt was taken directly to the medical ward and treated for his injuries. In the National Guard medical ward, Von Kalt held the Metacron. He became neurodigital water. He flowed over the facility's systems, effortlessly filling the cracks and hollow spaces until he was the system. When the 2 fully loaded drones came online, the operators were already locked out. The soldiers panicked and alerted their superiors, who panicked even more, having even less control. The hangar doors opened and the drones lifted off, streaking away from the armory. Inquiries as to the volume of escaping warheads only fueled the chaos of rising pulses and tempers. Von Kalt was never suspected, as he, for all appearances, was fast asleep. He was greatly pleased with this solution, as he would no longer be required to deliver significant amounts of DNA to that snake Bergstrom. Watching the chaos through the various satellites and traffic cameras, Von Kalt wondered if he'd be able to distinguish between the pops caused by the warheads and those caused by the children's failsafe devices. "We're not just going to leave all these guns, are we?" Ashley asked. "We are leaving all these guns," Ross said. Jeff threw himself onto the couch. "They're here! Get down!" Ashley and Ross looked at him as if he were crazy, but then 2 devastating explosions rocked the facility. The structure screamed as it cracked apart in several places. 2 more rockets hit, damaging the gravity drive and throwing the motel's horizontal balance into seizures. The plate's ability to stay balanced had been upset and the facility was losing altitude. furniture slid fore and aft, threatening anyone trapped between it and a wall. They dodged the sliding mattresses, the table, and the various electronics as Ross corralled them toward the sedan. Jeff made it in first, climbing into the back seat, followed by Ash, who held the door open for Ross. He climbed in and started the car. Ashley pulled the door closed as the building took a rather severe tilt, throwing her against the glass. Ross triggered the remote to release the breakaway hatch, but the sedan refused to separate from the falling building. Ross threw the vehicle into drive, trying to pull away by force, but the hatch wouldn't break free. He put the car back in park and opened his door. He'd have to do it by hand. Before he got out, Ross reached inside his jacket and pulled out the diplomatic pouch, containing the false identification and reservations that would get them across the border. He handed it to Ashley without a word. Ash and Jeff watched as Ross tried and failed to pop the hinges by hitting the emergency release levers. Finally, he pulled out his pistol and shot them off. The first one gave easily. The second practically exploded. The third and fourth ripped free as the car returned to its fixed elevation, rocketing away from the falling motel. Ash and Jeff watched Ross fall away from them. He stood at the hatch, shrinking as the distance between them increased. The facility turned. They could no longer see him. The rockets and internal explosions had destroyed the motel's structure. A few seconds later, it smashed into an oceanfront community. Any of the munitions that hadn't been detonated went up in a series of booms and kabooms. The explosions were so forceful that no complete bodies of the soldiers were recovered from the wreckage. There were plenty of fragments and bodies belonging to innocent citizens, but no evidence of what precipitated the attack. Of course, neither Ross nor the children were found among the debris. Once the unit was far enough away from Ash and Jeff, he'd activated his phase cam and flown away from the falling motel. Things had definitely taken a turn for the surreal. Croswell had just executed the White House Chief of Staff after framing him for conspiracy in the Bergstrom mess. Ross had been surprised. Croswell hadn't filled him in on this part of the plan. Maybe he'd made it up on the spur of the moment. My God, lunatics and madmen surround me. It was little trouble for the experienced vet to keep up with the cruiser's autopilot. He followed Ashley and Jeff. As long as they were safe, he'd keep his word and not break the fifth wall. What the hell was Fox thinking?